has heard of the word consent here? Feel free to raise your hand. All right, we see that. There is not just one definition for consent, and that's why it's a little complicated for people to understand that.
In the Me Too era, schools across the U.S. are considering adding classes to teach kids about sexual consent. Lawmakers in at least 5 states are working on legislation that would require some form of consent education in public schools at various levels. Oklahoma is one of them.
Hi, is Representative Thompson in by chance? I don't know if she's here. She's not here, so put a check mark by him. Hi, do you have a moment? We're trying to get a bill passed out of committee. It's actually named after Lauren, and Lauren is right here, as a matter of fact.
Nice to meet you.
Lauren Atkins is a 17-year-old high school senior in Norman, Oklahoma, and she's a first-time lobbyist.
And this was named after you? Do you mind telling me what your story is?
I was at a party and someone sexually assaulted me there. I told my parents, I went to the police.
And the biggest issue was he didn't understand what consent was.
Yeah, he had no idea.
Lauren's working with Stacey Wright, an advocate for teen victims of sexual assault, and State Representative Jacob Rosecrants, to pass a bill that would give Oklahoma public school teachers training to teach kids about consent. Oklahoma law defines consent as affirmative, unambiguous, and voluntary agreement to engage in a specific sexual activity. The law also says you can't give consent when you're incapacitated from alcohol.
Tell me about what happened to you at the party. It was last year, right?
Yes. I got there, just started drinking. I was talking to all my friends. Some of them were playing beer pong. Just typical night. I start throwing up. I don't even remember. I guess I just blacked out in that second. And I woke up and I was on the bed.
And what was happening?
That's when he was raping me.
Afterwards, Lauren and the boy exchanged Snapchat messages, where they argued about what happened. He also claimed she had given consent earlier in the night. She says she didn't. Vice News made multiple attempts to reach the accused. We were unsuccessful. Lauren filed a police report, but the district attorney ultimately didn't prosecute. They tell Vice News there wasn't a, quote, reasonable likelihood of proving all elements of the crime.
In that moment, I thought there was nothing else I could do ever. My dad was telling me, he was like, Lauren, I'll try as hard as I can to, get you justice. We'll do whatever we can, but right now, there was no other option we could see.
But Lauren did find another option. Lauren went public with her story, and then teamed up with Stacey, the advocate, who wrote the framework for the law.
We're very proud of you.
Thanks.
It's a wonderful thing you're doing.
Thank you. So many hype men in my life.
What made you decide consent classes would be the solution?
With what happened to me, I feel like if he knew what he was doing was wrong, he might not have done it. I don't think he necessarily did it as a malicious act. It was out of being an idiot.
And so what do you want people to know that he didn't know?
I want them to know where boundaries are. And it's not even just with sex. It's healthy relationships and what people can and can't do to you.
There are a few models for how to teach consent in the classroom.
Who has heard of the word consent here? Feel free to raise your hand. All right, we see that. There is not just one definition for consent, and that's why it's a little complicated for people to understand that.
Some schools, like Innovations High in Utah, partner with outside groups, like Planned Parenthood, to conduct workshops.
It's important to know that sexual consent needs to be enthusiastic. So if I were to hug Allie right now without asking, she's stepping back, right? So she's not wanting to participate in that, right?
Lauren and her friends say those kinds of conversations are completely absent from the sex ed they get in school.
The way they teach it as if sex is something that just happens to you, not something that you're necessarily in control of.
It really is how it is. They'll just teach you about anatomy, and then they'll be wear a condom, don't get STDs, but they won't say much else. I feel they might be uncomfortable too.
They don't get into any of the emotions. They just focus on the physicality of it. They just assume it's going to be a perfect scenario. They don't make any room for anything bad to happen.
But the bill doesn't actually require consent to be taught in the classroom. Oklahoma's so conservative, the bill has to be watered down if it has any chance.
So you're starting with a bill that allows for teachers to be taught about consent education, that kind of thing, healthy relationships.
You got it.
Is that because that's the best you can do? Because it's that big of a lift?
baby steps. We're creating a bridge between our teachers and our students to be able to have those conversations. And then also, once it gets out of these committees, perhaps we start talking to other lawmakers and saying, hey, do you think it would be a good idea to also set this to where we can do a class?
But Oklahoma activists, who call themselves parents' rights advocates, still say they'll lobby against it.
The wording actually says promote safe and healthy relationships. Well, I don't know about you, but even our definition of safe and healthy relationships might not be the same.
It's very clear from the Me Too movement and the conversation we're having that this isn't taught at home. So do you really trust parents to, teach this kind of thing?
No, I don't necessarily trust parents, but on the other hand, I trust the government less.
So I'm wondering what you think the likelihood of Lauren's bill passing is.
It seems to me that this bill is tied to a personal story. The personal story is tragic, and when lawmakers are sitting across the room from somebody who has walked a brutal path, it is very hard to say no.
The bill got a committee hearing today.
It really could have been prevented by him knowing what was right and what was wrong.
And despite some pushback, it passed. But it still has to pass the full House and Senate before it's signed into law. If the bill fails at any step of the way, Lauren, Stacey, and Jacob have to start over again next year.
If it doesn't pass, which I have a really strong feeling that it will, but if it doesn't, we'll just try again next year, just because it's still going to be just as important next year.